I'm Fran Halsall of Sheffield Woodland Connections, which is one of Sheffield's many tree charter branches, and I actually do walks at this cemetery. And although my project was originally based at Eccleshall Woods, which is Sheffield's, or indeed South Yorkshire's largest ancient woodland, there are so many fine woodlands around Sheffield. We're really blessed, and this is one of the great examples of urban woodland. We've got a huge diversity of species here, and because this cemetery is now well over 100 years old, many of these trees are veterans, so they've got real character and they're great to explore. We're looking at this wonderful oak tree in Sheffield General Cemetery. This is one of the larger oak trees here. I can't actually tell which species it is. It could be a sessile oak or it could be an English oak, because we're here at the wrong time of year really, because this is spring, but what we actually need is acorns to be able to tell what species we're looking at. But this will be one of the oak trees that's actually probably contemporary with the age of the park. It's possibly even earlier, an even earlier date than that. It's quite a sizable tree, and oaks take a long time to grow to a large size, so we can be fairly confident that this is approaching veteran status. One of the most recognisable properties of oaks is their incredibly rough bark. I often liken it to elephant skin. It's got that incredibly cracked appearance, and they only get more craggy with age. I would describe them as a light brown tree with hints of grey in them, so that's one of the things that distinguishes them from some of the other rough bark trees that you might find in this cemetery. Oak are what's described as a light canopied species, and what this means is that they have an open structure which allows plenty of light to pass through onto the woodland floor. And this is why they're compatible with our native flora. In this part of the world, in this part of the Pennines, we actually have what's called oak birch woodland, so that's the predominant type of woodland. And it will grow with bluebells, and we have a lot of bluebells here in Sheffield because we have a lot of ancient woodland. They're an ancient woodland indicator species. However, these particular bluebells here are Spanish bluebells. If you like, they've been introduced from gardens, so it would be nice to actually see native bluebells here, but obviously somebody's decided to plant these instead because there was quite a fashion for them many decades ago, and they've probably been here for a very long time. This is an oak leaf, and this is obviously one of the more recognisable leaf shapes that we have in the British Isles. Most people would know this as an oak, but they're actually quite variable. If we look at this oak here, I imagine it's the same species. It could be either sessile oak actually or English oak. It's again hard to tell because we haven't got the acorns here. But if we compare those leaf shapes, you can actually see there's quite a difference between them. But what defines an oak leaf is this incredibly dissected shape. It's deeply lobed, and that's what gives it this classic and very memorable outline that everyone knows. So this is an area of the cemetery which has been put aside for conservation as one of a few areas within the cemetery where the priority is for nature rather than people. And this is what I describe as naturalistic vegetation. There's an awful lot of sticky bud here at the moment, also known as goosegrass, and there's some brambles coming through as well. Now, one of the things that has been done in this area, because it was actually quite dense with tree seedlings at one point a few years ago, so the Conservation Trust here have actually decided to thin out some of those seedlings, because that gives certain trees an advantage, because it'll mean that they grow well. So there's a few things coming through here. We've got some oak trees over there, but we've also got a cherry coming through here. So this is a good mix of native woodland, and just in the light over there we've also got a hawthorn. I'm standing here under the shade of a beech tree, and this is on Sanford Walk. This is a row of trees, an avenue that was actually created in the 1830s, back when the park was opened, or the cemetery was opened. And this is a very shade-dense species, so it's actually got a very crowded crown, lots of leaves, lots of branches, and it doesn't allow anything to grow underneath it, but I'm actually grateful today for being under the shade of this tree because it's 26 degrees. So on a day like today, beech trees really do come into their own. So this is one of the larger trees, larger beech trees on Sandford Walk, and unfortunately you'll notice that it's had to be topped. This was a safety issue because this tree was very seriously affected by the giant Polypore, or Meropilus giganteus. And so it's really sad, but it's had to be removed. We can still tell it's a beech tree though, because it's a very smooth bark, and obviously you can see some ruptures in the bark. Think of this like as your skin gets older, it kind of cracks a little bit. But if you look at the quality of the bark itself, it's grey. I would always describe it as grey. Sometimes they've got a slight sheen to them when they're younger, but this one's starting to look a little bit old. You know, it's got a few characteristics that have got a little bit of an aged skin to it. But it's easy to tell apart from other trees because it is that classic grey colour. So this is one of the plane trees in the cemetery. It's actually an oriental plane, so there's 3 of these here. They're quite special trees, there's not many of them around in Sheffield, and we can tell them apart from the ordinary plane tree that you see quite a lot of, which is the London plane, or Platanus hispanica, because it's again got a very divided leaf, so it's quite elongated on the lobes and it's got this very distinctive profile. You might possibly mistake it for a maple leaf. Occasionally people do, but it's a quite distinctive leaf in its own right. The reason I know it's definitely a plane tree is what I describe as a little pom-pom. So this is a flower, and when this actually ripens, rather than it being like a conkery type thing as you might imagine, if you pull it apart, it's more like a thistle inside. It's all soft and fluffy and downy, so it's quite nice when it actually explodes and you get this cloud of fluff disappearing around the cemetery. One of the distinctive features of plane trees is it's got this incredibly flaky bark. Now, not that I encourage people to do this, but you can actually lift the scales of the bark. This is something that this tree is well known for, and it's one of the reasons it's very pollution tolerant, so it's why it's an excellent urban tree and quite often planted in cities and towns. But further up the tree, it's got almost like a camouflage pattern to it, so it's many different sort of neutral shades. Sometimes there's a little bit of green in there, like buff pinks as well. So it's a colourful tree with a very distinctive bark, so it's also a very attractive ornamental tree. And this is one of the reasons that, again, it's planted widely, because it has these excellent properties and it looks visually great.